I had presided over the choosing right every year for 14 years, and in 14 years, nothing in that arena had surprised me. The Maw, they called it, the great stone fighting ring sunk into the heart of Vorith's central square, open to the sky, ringed on all sides by tiered granite stands that could hold 3,000 wolves when the city was full. For the choosing, it held two. Every unmated wolf of declared lineage came down to the floor, stood before the pack, named their bloodline and their worth, and either found a match or did not. I sat above it all on the high balcony throne, my counsel at my back, and I watched. I had watched it so many times that I no longer truly saw it. My wolf had gone quiet years ago on the matter of mates. He had stopped restless pacing, stopped lifting his head every time a woman walked into the hall. I had decided, somewhere around the 7th year, that my fated mate was a story the old shamans told to keep lonely alphas from ruling badly, and I had made my peace with it. Vorith was my mate. The city, the pack, the 14,000 wolves who lived under my walls, they were what I had. The right that morning moved the way it always moved. Family by family, the declared wolves came forward, the Kasvar sons broad and polished, the Iron Daughters trained since childhood to present well, minor pack representatives from the outer wards nervous and young. I gave each one a nod, a word, a dismissal, or a welcome. My counsel whispered names and lineages in my ear. I barely listened. Then the Dunville name was called. I knew the Dunvilles, a minor pack family from the North Quarter, old enough to have standing in the city, not prominent enough to have earned much attention from me. 3 sons of their own blood, none of whom had distinguished themselves, and a ward. That was the word the herald used. Ward, not daughter, not niece, ward. She came down the stone steps into the Maw last, behind the 3 Dunville sons, and I watched the stand shift before I had fully registered her. A ripple of sound, not hostility, not quite, but the particular cruelty that lives in laughter that does not fully commit to itself. Half the crowd did not bother to hide it. Someone in the far stands called out something I did not catch, and the row nearest them found it funny. She was not what the laughter expected her to be. I do not know what I expected either. A flinching girl, perhaps. Someone red with shame, trying to make herself small, wishing the stones would swallow her before the Alpha King's eyes found her. She was not that. She walked onto the floor of the Maw with the particular posture of someone who has been told, many times over a long life, that the room's opinion of her is the only thing that matters, and who has arrived, quietly and without dramatics, at the decision that it does not. Not defiance. Nothing so loud as defiance. Only a stillness that did not ask the crowd's permission. She had no mark. I could see that from the throne. The declaring wolves always bared the inside of their left wrist as they came forward, the mark of lineage, the wolf's seal in the skin, the inheritance of bloodline made visible. The Dunville sons had shown theirs coming down the steps, 3 clean dark marks in the pale morning light. The girl kept her wrist at her side, because there was nothing to show. Unmarked, wolfless in the old language, the word the laughter in the stands was built around. My counsel did not wait for me to ask. Stellan, my first advisor, leaned forward and said, in the voice he used for things he considered self-evident, "The ward. No declared lineage, no mark. The Dunville family has apparently been housing her out of some obligation to her late mother. The records are unclear. She should not be at the choosing at all. I imagine they've brought her simply to fulfill the household declaration requirement. Shall I tell the herald to move on?" I did not answer. Stellan waited. My wolf, who had been still for years, genuinely, profoundly, resignedly still, lifted his head. It was not a sound. It was not a movement. It was a shift in the quality of the silence inside me, the way the temperature of a room changes before anyone has lit a fire. Something old and instinctive rearranging itself, the way a compass needle swings when iron comes near. I leaned forward in my throne. Below me in the Maw, the girl stood on the arena floor, and she was not looking at the crowd. She was not performing composure. She simply had it. Her hands were at her sides. The morning light came over the eastern wall of the arena and caught the side of her face, and I could see from this distance, in this light, which was not good light for subtlety, that she was not braced for humiliation. She had already moved past it. She was somewhere else inside herself entirely, and whatever was there was quiet and untouchable, and my wolf was on his feet. Voss, Stellan again, patient, certain of the outcome. I stood up. That was enough to stop everything. When the Alpha King of Vorith stands in the choosing throne, the herald goes silent. The council goes still. 3,000 wolves in the stands or near enough go quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when something unexpected happens and no one wants to miss it. I came down the steps from the high balcony. I had not come down to the mall floor in a choosing rite in 11 years, not since the second year, when there had been a bloodline dispute that required my word in person. The herald stepped back. The Dunville sons stepped back. The girl did not step back. I crossed the arena floor toward her. 14 years of governing a pack city, and I have learned that the body broadcasts the truth before the mind finishes arguing about it. My body was already certain of something that my mind had not yet allowed itself to name. My wolf was not pacing. He was not restless. He had gone very, very still in the way he only went still when the most important thing he had ever needed to pay attention to was directly in front of him. She watched me come toward her with those quiet eyes. Brown, with something in them that caught the torchlight, not the torches. There were no torches in the morning rite. It was full day. And I realized after a moment that what I was seeing was not a trick of light, but something underneath the surface of her gaze, a warmth that did not announce itself, the kind that has been kept for a long time without an outlet and has simply become part of the person. I stopped 2 feet from her. "You're the ward," I said, not unkindly, simply the fact. "Yes," she said. Her voice was even, not practiced even, simply even. "What is your name?" "Marin." I waited for more. She did not offer it. Not because she was being difficult. I have been lied to by practiced people for 14 years, and I know what difficulty wears when it is dressed as silence. This was not that. She simply had no more to add. Her name was Marin. That was the whole of what she knew about herself that was worth saying in a choosing arena, and she was not going to dress it up. "Your lineage," I said. "Unknown," a pause barely there, to me. That last addition to me was precise, not a performance of ignorance, a precision. Something had been kept from her, and she knew it had been kept, and she was not pretending otherwise. My wolf felt the precision the way a tongue feels a loose tooth, with absolute certainty of what it was finding. I looked at her wrist, the unmarked inside of her left wrist, pale and smooth in the morning light, the skin where a lineage mark would be if she had one. There are things in this world that I know, and one of them is that a mark cannot be absent. A wolf born without one is rarer than white stone, and even then the shamans will tell you there is always a reason, always a story. A mark is sealed sometimes, held back, waiting. Waiting for what the old texts say is never the same twice. My wolf said, "Ask her." I said, "Have you ever tried to shift?" The stands were completely silent. I was dimly aware of this. 3,000 wolves and not one of them breathing audibly. Marin looked at me, not startled, but something in her that had been very still became slightly less still, as if the question had found a door she had thought was locked. "I was told I couldn't," she said. "By whom?" "The Dunvilles." I did not look at the Dunville family. Not yet. I kept my eyes on her. "That is not the same thing as being unable," I said. A very small thing happened in her expression then, not quite a crack, not quite an opening, more the way light moves differently through glass when you shift the angle, the same glass suddenly showing you something it was always refracting and you simply had not stood in the right place to catch it. She understood what I was telling her. She had perhaps always suspected it, and had never been given permission to suspect it out loud. "What would you like me to do?" she said. 14 years. I have not been surprised in 14 years. Shift, I said. What happened next, I have replayed every day since. Not because it was dramatic, though it was. Not because the crowd reacted the way they reacted, though they did. But because of the moment before. The half-second between my command and what it unlocked, when Marin stood on the arena floor of the mall and simply breathed in, and something that had been sealed inside her for her entire life felt that seal give way. I felt it. That is the part I cannot explain to my counsel, who require explanations. I cannot put language around what it felt like to be standing 2 feet from her when the sealed mark on her left wrist, the mark that the Dunvilles had told her did not exist, had never been there, could not be there, broke open. I can tell you the visible facts. The skin of her wrist lit from within, a deep silver white like moonlight forced through stone. I can tell you that the light spread up her arm and across her collarbone, and that her eyes, which had been steady and brown, went the color of a full moon on clear water. I can tell you that my wolf, who had been still for a decade, let out one long breath that was not a sound I made but a sound he made, deep in the cage of my chest, and that the breath carried in it something I had no category for. I can tell you what the crowd did. I can tell you the stands went from 3,000 wolves to silence in the space of a single heartbeat, not the polite silence of an event going sideways, but the absolute silence of a room where something has happened that everyone present will remember for the rest of their lives. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awe. I can tell you what emerged. A white wolf, not the pale gray that passes for white in common speech, not the winter coat silver that some northern lineages carry. White. The white of the old silver blood line, the lineage that the shaman said had been extinct for 3 generations, the bloodline that the moon herself was supposed to have gifted in the age before pack wars, when the world was younger and the bond between wolves and the sky was still being written. The largest, most purely white wolf I had ever seen in my life stood on the arena floor where Marin had been standing, and it looked at me with eyes the color of the full moon, and my wolf made that sound again. The one that was not a howl and not a breath, but something in between, the sound of recognition at the cellular level, the sound of something that had been waiting my entire life, finally being allowed to stop waiting. The pack lore around Silverbloods is extensive, because the subject of extinct things that return always generates extensive lore. I had read it the way I read everything, thoroughly, without expectation that it would be relevant to my life. One piece of it came back to me then, on the arena floor, with perfect clarity. A Silverblood's mark is sealed at birth until the alpha of her blood call gives the command to shift. She will not know what she is. She will be told she is nothing. She will carry the seal without knowing it is a seal. When the alpha calls, the seal breaks, and what she is cannot be hidden again. The alpha of her blood call, the phrase the old texts used for the fated mate, the one whose voice, specifically, would unlock what had always been there. My voice. My command. She had been waiting, her wolf had been waiting, sealed and silenced. For the 14 years I had sat on that throne above the maw without coming down to the floor. For the day I would look at a girl the crowd was laughing at and say, "Shift." I stood on the arena floor and let the weight of that settle into my chest, and it was not a light weight, and I was not sorry for it. She shifted back in moments, the way Silverbloods are said to do smoothly, without the long transition that younger or less certain wolves take. Marin stood on the arena floor again, in her own skin, and blinked once in the white morning light and looked at me. Her expression was the one I had catalogued from the throne, composed, but the composure was different now. Before, it had been the composure of someone who has made peace with not being seen. Now it was something else. Now it was the composure of someone who has been seen, all the way down to what she had not known was there, and has not yet decided what to do with the size of it. I held out my hand. She looked at it for a moment, not with suspicion, not with calculation, but with the careful attention of someone who has been handed very few things that were meant to be given freely and has learned to look carefully before accepting. Then she put her hand in mine. My wolf went still again, the second kind of still, the other one, the one that was not resignation but completion, the stillness of a thing arriving at the place it had always been heading. I turned to face the stands. I had no speech prepared. I have given thousands of words in 14 years of ruling, proclamations, judgments, declarations, the formal language of pack law and the informal language of a king who needs his people to believe him. None of those prepared phrases were available to me on the arena floor of the maw with my fated mate's hand in mine and 3,000 stunned wolves looking down at us. I said what was true. "This is Marin," I said. My voice carries without effort in the maw, the stone was built for it. "She is a silver blood, and she is the Alpha Queen of Vorith. She will be addressed as such from this morning forward, by everyone in this city, from the highest council seat to the lowest ward." The silence held for another 3 seconds. Then the nearest section of the stands, the old guard families, the ones who knew pack lore, the ones who had read the same texts I had read about silver bloods, began to kneel. It moved like water through the tears. Row by row, family by family, the stands went down, not because I had told them to, because they had watched a sealed silver blood emerge on the arena floor of the maw in response to the Alpha King's command. And there was not a wolf in those stands old enough to read who did not understand what they had witnessed. 3,000 wolves kneeling. I watched it happen and felt, for the first time in 14 years, that the city I had thought was my only mate was offering me something different, not in place of itself, but alongside it. A correction, a completion. The piece of the picture I had decided was missing, and then convinced myself I had not needed. I did not let go of her hand while my counsel descended to the arena floor. I did not let go of it while Stellan, white-faced, recalculated everything he had planned to say in the next 10 minutes. I did not let go of it while the herald scrambled for the formal language of the Silver Blood Declaration, a ceremony so old it had not been used in living memory, so that the young herald had to be prompted by one of the ancient pack shamans who had come down from the upper tier on unsteady legs, moving faster than I had seen him move in years, his whole face lit up with the expression of a man watching a story he had told as legend becomes something he could touch. "She is the king's silver blood," the shaman said to the herald, not unkindly, in the tone of someone correcting a well-meaning error. "The declaration is not the standard choosing declaration. It is the moonbending. We have not spoken it in this arena in over 60 years. The herald looked at me. I nodded once. The shaman spoke the moonbending from memory, which did not surprise me. Men who spend their lives tending the old lore tend to keep it in the places that do not fade. It was not a long declaration. It was precise, the way old things often are, the way language is when it has been worn smooth by centuries of being necessary. It named her bloodline. It confirmed the seal breaking. It named me as the Alpha whose call had unlocked her, and it named that fact for what it was. Not coincidence, not ceremony, but destiny made audible. Marin stood beside me through all of it, still holding my hand, and listened to the words being spoken about her with the expression of someone hearing the explanation for something that has been confusing them for their entire life. Not joy, not yet. That came later, private, in the room above the city where I took her after the maw had emptied and the crowds had gone. In that moment on the arena floor, with the shaman's words still settling into the stone around us, she was quieter than joy. She was the specific quiet of someone who has just been handed, at long last, the true name for themselves. She had not known what she was. They had made certain of that. The Dunvilles. I handled the matter of the Dunville family after the moonbending in the same arena, before the same witnesses. I did not raise my voice. I have found, over 14 years, that the things that need to be said most clearly are said better without volume. The family had tried to leave during the declaration. They had not gotten far. 2 of my guard at each exit had ensured that. The Dunville patriarch came to the center of the mall when called. A middle-aged man with the look of someone who has spent a lifetime making small calculations about risk and advantage, and has, on this particular morning, arrived at the reckoning that all such calculations eventually reach. He was not quite defiant. He was not quite sorry. He was in the terrible middle place between those 2 positions, which is called being caught. "You knew," I said, not a question. He said nothing. "Her mother's name," I said. "The records on your ward's intake are unclear, your council member Stellan tells me. I suspect they are unclear because you made them so. Her mother came to you carrying a silver blood child with a sealed mark, and you knew what the seal meant, and you kept the child and kept the knowledge and told her she was nothing." The Dunville patriarch looked at the ground. "We sheltered her," he said. "When her mother died, we—" "You sheltered a silver blood heir," I said, "and told her she was wolfless so that she would not know to look for what she was owed. She has lived for how long in your household?" Marin answered before anyone could answer for her. She had not moved from beside me. 15 years, she said. The word went around the arena in the specific way that numbers go around crowds when the number confirms something that makes people furious. Not a murmur, a movement. The pack settling its judgment. 15 years, I said. She came to the choosing today as a ward without lineage, brought, as I understand it, only because household attendance at the rite is a legal requirement, and you could not leave her home without questions being asked. You expected the herald to call her forward, the crowd to laugh, and the choosing to move on without incident. The patriarch did not deny it. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs to men whose plans have failed so completely that they have no room left to operate in. He was in that silence now, and it fit him badly, and I did not feel sorry for him. I stripped the Dunville family of their standing in the North Quarter ward. I gave them the choice that pack law allows: remain in Vorith under reduced status, or remove themselves to the outer territories. I gave them 1 week to decide. I gave the family holding the house, the assets, the ward territory claim to the City Commons Trust to be administered for the benefit of the North Quarter wolves who had nothing to do with what had been done and should not suffer for it. The patriarch left the mall without speaking again. I have been told by my counsel in the weeks since that this was a proportionate response. I have been told by other advisors that it was lenient. I suspect the truth is somewhere between, the way most truths are. What I know is that it was correct, and that Marin, standing beside me when I announced it, did not tell me to go further or to pull back. She simply stood there in the particular quiet that had become, for me, in the span of a single morning, the thing I oriented myself by. Her presence like a fixed point, her stillness like a direction. The weeks after the maw were not simple. They never are. When a king announces a Luna the city was not expecting. The political structures that have grown up around a 14-year absence of a queen do not dismantle themselves politely or quickly. Stellan had spent a decade calibrating alliances on the assumption that I would remain unmated, or that if I mated it would be to a prominent pack daughter from a known lineage. The kind of match that can be prepared for, anticipated, navigated in advance. A silver blood ward from a minor pack household whom the city had laughed at that morning was not something he had in any of his plans. He is a good advisor precisely because, when reality overrules his plans, he updates his plans. It took him approximately 4 days to update them. Marin adapted more quietly than I expected, and more completely than I had any right to hope. She had lived her whole life in the margins of a household that did not truly claim her, and she had learned the particular skill of that place. How to watch. How to read the architecture of a room, who deferred to whom, what the silences meant, where the actual decisions were made versus where the announced decisions were made. She brought that skill into my council chambers and into the great hall and into the long formal meals that the Queen's presence required, and she watched, and she catalogued, and she waited until she had understood something before she said it. The first time she spoke up in a council session, it was on a matter of North Quarter resource allocation, the redistribution of the Dunville territory as it happened. She asked 3 questions in sequence, each of which was more precise than the last, and by the third question my entire council had stopped what they were doing and given her their full attention. Stellan, to his credit, answered the third question with something I had not seen him produce in months: genuine uncertainty. He admitted it. She suggested a partial solution. The council adopted it. She left the session without commentary. I caught her in the corridor after, and she looked at me with those steady eyes, and I said, "You've been watching my council for 11 days, and you knew the answer to the resource dispute." "I thought it might not be my place to say," she said. "It is exactly your place," I said. She thought about that for a moment. "I'm still learning where the edges are," she said. "Stop looking for edges," I said. "There aren't any, not for you." She looked at me for a long time with an expression I was still learning to read, the one that meant she was absorbing something without quite believing it yet, turning it over, checking it for the catch she expected to find. Then she said, "All right," and she meant it. "I want to say something about what I found in the months after the Maw, because it is the part that the formal record will not carry, and that I want carried somewhere. I expected the Silverblood bond to be what the lore described: powerful, destined, unmistakable. It was all of those things. I had not expected it to be also ordinary in the best sense of the word. Ordinary the way that things become when they are genuinely part of your life, not a ceremony or an occasion, but simply the texture of the days. Marin would bring documents to the study in the late evening when the rest of the keep had quieted, and she would work at the table near the window, not with me, not asking for my attention, simply working in the same room. She had taken on the administration of 3 North Quarter community trusts within the first month, because the work needed doing and she could see how it needed doing and no one else had done it. She did not announce this. She simply did it, and I found out when one of the trust liaisons mentioned it in a council session, and I looked at Marin, and she looked back at me with the expression that meant she had not thought it was worth a report. She laughed sometimes in the late evenings. Not often. She was not a person who laughed easily or publicly, but sometimes, when something in the document struck her as absurd in the way that bureaucratic things are absurd, or when my wolf, who had apparently decided that his long years of dignity had been adequately fulfilled and could now be set aside, did something undignified and she caught it. The first time I heard her laugh I was at my desk, and she was at the window table, and she made no attempt to contain it and no apology for it, and something in my chest that I had not known was compressed released in the same moment. She asked one evening about her mother, what the records said, beyond what the Dunvilles had constructed. I had had my people looking. I told her what we had found: a woman named Sorrow Aldrin, a Silverblood of the Eastern Ranges, who had come to Vorith carrying a sealed infant and looking for safe shelter, and who had died of a fever in the North Quarter before she could establish herself anywhere the pack records would have tracked. She had asked the Dunvilles for shelter for herself and her daughter. They had accepted. She had died within a year. Her daughter had remained. Marin listened to all of this with the contained attention that was her nature, and at the end she said, "She came here looking for the right place for me." "It appears so," I said. "She found it," Marin said, "just not in the way she was looking for." I did not have an answer for that. I sat with it, and she sat with it beside me in the quiet study, and my wolf, who had been still for years and who had now found the particular stillness of having arrived somewhere, breathed steadily in the silence. The formal crowning was held at the end of the second month in the great hall, which holds 700 wolves when full. It was full. I will not describe the ceremony at length. It is in the public record, and the public record is accurate as far as it goes. I will tell you what the public record does not tell you, which is what she looked like walking into the great hall in the Luna's silver and white, after a lifetime of wearing the clothes that other people decided she deserved, in a room that 700 wolves stood up to receive her in. She looked exactly like herself. That is the thing about Marin that I came to understand in those months. She did not transform when the world finally gave her what she should always have had. She did not expand into some more elaborate version of herself that had been suppressed, did not arrive at grand gestures or a need for the room's constant attention. She simply looked like herself, only without the particular quiet economy of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. The same stillness, the same precision, the same eyes that held warmth the way deep water holds warmth, not visible on the surface, present all the way through. She wore the silver blood mark openly now. On the inside of her left wrist, the seal breaking had left not just the lineage mark but the moonbinding mark as well, the second mark, the one the old lore said appeared when a silver blood found her blood call Alpha, a small half-moon silver alongside the older mark. She did not cover it. She did not display it. She simply wore it the way she wore everything about herself, without apology, without performance. I put the Luna's circlet on her head in the great hall of Vorath, before 700 of my pack, many of whom had been in the maw the morning she shifted for the first time, and some of whom had been in the stands that laughed. I said the formal words. She said the formal words back to me in the clear, precise voice that I had come to understand as one of her native languages, alongside silence and action. Then, because the ceremony was done and the formal words had been said and the circlet was on her head and 700 wolves were watching us, she looked at me with those eyes, not performance, not occasion, simply the steady regard that I had spent 2 months learning to rely on the way I relied on the wall at my back. And she said, quietly enough that it was meant for me and not the room, "You didn't have to come down to the floor." She meant the arena. She meant the morning in the maw. She meant that I could have let Stellan wave her away with a word and gone back to my 14 years of certainty that fate had nothing left to offer me. "No," I said. She waited. "My wolf did not give me a great deal of choice in the matter," I said. Something moved in her expression, not quite the laugh, but adjacent to it, the thing that lived next door. "A king," she said, "governed by his wolf." "By his wolf's better judgment," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer, and then she looked at the great hall, the 700 wolves, the old shaman in the front row who was visibly in the best moment of his professional life, Stellan beside him with the expression of a man who has revised his plans so thoroughly that the original plans are no longer recognizable, and has decided to call this an improvement, and she said, "All right." The same 2 words she had said in the corridor when I told her to stop looking for edges, carrying the same weight. The acceptance that was not resignation but something cleaner, a decision made by a person who makes decisions carefully, that this was real and could be trusted and was hers. 700 wolves bowed. The pack that had laughed in the maw that morning, the minor families and the prominent families and the old guard houses and the outer ward representatives, all of them, they bowed to the woman they had laughed at. I watched it happen and thought of the word the shaman had used in the moonbinding ceremony, sealed. She had been sealed, not absent, sealed, hidden not because she was nothing but because she was something specific and rare and waiting for the exact conditions that would allow her to be seen. 15 years she had lived as a ward, as a charity case, as the unmarked girl without lineage or standing, and she had moved through all of it with that particular composure, not the composure of someone who has given up but the composure of something sealed, waiting, patient in the way that only things with somewhere specific to arrive can be patient. She had arrived. I had arrived, for that matter, after 14 years of sitting on a throne above an arena and watching the world present itself to me without offering me a single surprise. We had arrived, as the lore said, in the same place at the same moment, at the intersection that had always been there waiting to be found. I govern Vorith differently now. Not dramatically. I am not a man given to dramatic reinvention, and the city does not require it. But differently. Marin has a way of asking questions that assumes the answer is worth finding, and that assumption turns out to be contagious. 3 North Quarter community trusts are now 5, and the model she built for the first 3 is being studied by 2 other cities in the Highland Territory who have sent their pack liaisons to Vorith to understand how the allocation structure works. The liaison meetings are run by Marin, not by me, and they run better for it. Stellan has stopped calling her the ward in council sessions. He calls her the Luna Queen in formal settings and Marin in informal ones, and he defers to her on North Quarter matters entirely and on a growing list of other matters, with the particular deference of a man who has found someone whose judgment he trusts more than his own in the relevant domain, and has decided this is efficient rather than threatening. I consider this growth on his part. The Dunville family chose the outer territories. I have not seen them since. I do not expect to. The old shaman visits the keep on the 2nd day of every month to take tea with Marin and discuss the Silverblood lore, of which, it turns out, there is substantially more than the texts I read. The shaman has kept a great deal of it in the memory I suspected, and he is now setting it down in writing with Marin's help, for the archive, so that the next Silverblood who comes into a world that tells her she is nothing will have something to find when she goes looking. My wolf is the kind of still now that is not silence but rest, the difference between a thing that has stopped moving because it has given up and a thing that has stopped moving because it is exactly where it needs to be. He knows that difference. I know it because he knows it. We have been together long enough that this is simply how knowledge passes between us. Marin asked me, one evening in the late weeks of the 3rd month, whether I had believed in fated mates before the maw. I had decided not to, I said. That's not the same thing as not believing, she said. No, I said, it is not. She thought about that in the way she thought about things that were true and that she was deciding whether to say out loud. I never had the option of deciding, she said finally. I didn't know what I was. I couldn't decide whether to believe in a thing I didn't know existed. What did you believe? I said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the study window, Vorith was settling into the late winter dark, the city lights beginning to come on in the North Quarter, the far towers lit by the watchfires that burn all night. She looked at it, her city now, as much as mine, in the way that the lore had always meant it to be, and she said, I believed I was going somewhere. I didn't know where. I just knew the where I was, wasn't it? Into the light, the old shamans would have said. Into the light, where the sealed thing finds the air it was always meant to breathe. She had come into the maw as the girl the pack laughed at, and she had come out the other side of my command as what she had always been. The rarest wolf in the Highland Territory, my fated Luna, a Silverblood with 15 years of patience built into her bones, and a mind that had spent every one of those years getting sharper. I had come down to the arena floor on nothing but instinct and a wolf who had finally remembered what he was for. We had found the same light, from opposite directions, after years of not knowing the other was looking. She worked at the window table in the quiet of the evening, and I worked at my desk, and the city settled around us, and my wolf rested in the deep, easy stillness of a thing that has found the place it was always heading. And that was enough. That was everything.